guys, it's Kesara, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I started but did not finish in 2024. In this first section, we're going to be talking about books that I have on my on-pause shelf in Goodreads, meaning I started these books, but I stopped them for one reason or another, and I do plan to come back to them, but probably not by the end of the year. But they are books that I do plan to finish eventually. So the first book that I want to talk about is actually the only one that I could potentially pick back up and finish before the end of the year, and that's Babel by Kuang. Kuang is an author that I really love, and Babel was giving me kind of the same vibes that I was getting at like the very beginning of the Poppy War, which is like one of my favorite books by her. I liked those vibes. I liked what I was getting from this book. I was just not in the mood for this type of book. Like right after I picked it up, the election happened, and then suddenly I was not in a dark fantasy mood anymore. I don't actually know if this is dark fantasy, but just based off of history with her books, I feel like it might be, and I don't want to get spoiled for it because I've heard a lot of people like Babel a lot. So it's on pause for now, but this is one of the few books that I feel like if I get back into that mood, I will definitely pick up again because I do really love this author, and I liked like the dark academia vibes that I was getting from this book when I did first pick it up. Next we have The Ministry of Time by Kaliane. I really love the concept of it because there's a Ministry of Time, obviously, but this is part of the British government where basically they have figured out how to time travel. So they're taking people from the past and bringing them to the present. So it's a near future book. It doesn't read like a near future story though. It reads almost like historical fiction, which kind of makes sense because we have characters from like historical times that are in like the current or like near future time. But the problem with this book is that it's just boring. I feel like nothing happens, and I didn't get super far into it. Like I'm 40% of the way into this book, and I was listening to the audiobook, which normally if I'm listening to an audiobook, I could be listening to almost anything and I will still listen to it, even if I'm kind of slightly bored by it. It was just so boring. I was just like, there are other things that I could be listening to right now. I had to put it down. I will say like part of it is there were just other sci-fi that I was really interested in at the time. Like I read Children of Time around the same time that I was reading the Ministry of Time, and that book is a lot more interesting than this one. I don't know, like there wasn't enough to keep me interested in this book, and I just found it kind of boring. I probably will try and go back and read it at some point, mostly because I have a physical copy of this book. If I didn't have a physical copy of this book, I probably wouldn't. So this is like the time when I like am annoyed that I got a book of the month subscription because I probably wouldn't have bought this book for any other reason, but at the same time, I do sometimes get books that I end up really loving. So this just wasn't one of them. So the next book I want to talk about is The Winners by Fredrick. This is the third book in the Beartown series. I picked this up at the very beginning of the year. I'm gonna be honest, like I was not following along with the characters very well. Apparently, I have kind of forgotten about the characters in like Beartown and Us Against You. I have them right here. So like, I feel like if I really wanted to read this book and get out of it like the same feeling that I had from the previous books, I would have to reread Beartown and Us Against You. And while I do love both of those books, they're just not the type of books that I would reread. So that's why I ended up putting this one on pause. I do want to go back to it eventually, but I'll probably do that after I've reread the other two books if I decide to reread the other two books. So as of right now, I've put this one down. Let me know in the comments if you've read this one and if it's worth it, because I haven't really heard that much about this one, whereas I had heard a lot about the previous two. So I don't even know if I'll end up liking this one. So I don't really want to go back and reread the first two if I'm not going to end up liking this one. I don't know. I still want to do it eventually, but I just don't know when I'll have the time to do that. So the next book that I have to talk about is House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This is like one of the first books that I picked up this year that I was just like, I'm really excited for, which is like weird for me to say because I am not a Sarah J. Maas fan. The ending of the last book just made me excited for this one because it connected two stories and it connected to a story that I actually really like by Sarah J. Maas. That being said, it was a very small part of this book. It was the first couple of chapters. It wasn't even that interesting. So I don't know if I'm going to continue on with this one. I'm listening to the audiobook. I have like 8 hours left in the audiobook, and this is like a 30-hour audiobook, so I've read most of it, but I feel like the endings of these books are usually fairly good, but I just get so bored in like the 20 hours leading up to the ending that I don't know if I want to read the ending and actually end up liking this book if like the first 20 hours of the book were just disappointing for me. And I didn't like the part that actually connected the two series that I like. You know, it wasn't that great. Like, the actual crossover wasn't that great. So, like, it didn't even give me what I wanted from this book. Why would I want to read the ending? But I still put it just on pause because I did buy the audiobook rather than, like, borrowing it from the library. So I feel like because I bought it, I kind of do want to finish it eventually. I just don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon. I probably should. Like, I actually remember this book well enough that I could finish it, but it was just getting super boring. I don't know if I want to yet. And now we're gonna get into the books that are on my DNF shelf in Goodreads, meaning I have no plans to get back to these books. We have The Wolf King by Lauren Palfreyman. So this is a book that I picked up like on a complete whim. Like, I just wanted something like super easy to read, and this was a Prime free book. It was like one of the most popular books that I saw, and basically it's about, I guess, a princess who gets kidnapped by a werewolf who was like a prisoner. He was a prisoner that was being forced to fight other werewolves. They're basically dog fights, but like with werewolves. And then he is part of this like werewolf country or werewolf like pack, or like there's a bunch of them that the empire or the, I don't know the politics, like I don't remember it that much, but like whatever like society she's part of, they don't know about how intricate the wolf society is. And that's basically as far as I got into it, because like it just wasn't that well done. Like, I can see why it's popular because it's super fast paced, it's romantasy, and there's like this like maiden being like taken away by this werewolf, and like I can see why some people would read it, but it's just not my cup of tea. And even though it was like easy to read and quick, I feel like there are just other versions of that type of story that are just better that I picked up afterwards, that I just don't feel the need to come back to this one. And the next book that I want to talk about is the Untitled books by CJ Archer. This is the third book in the Crooked Librarian series. So this is like a historical alternate timeline fantasy about a librarian, and it's also very mystery driven. Like, the fantasy is very more paranormal, and it's more of like mystery story. Like, we have characters in this world that are solving mysteries, and there's like a romance plot, but I felt like by the time I got to the third book, the romance plot was not going anywhere. Like, it was just constantly her, the main character is a female, and her just thinking how like so sad that he doesn't like her, or like that she's not good enough for him and things like that. I felt like the romance plot was not going anywhere. The reason why I had originally picked up the books, I talked a little bit about in my vlog, was because I thought it was set in a more historical time, but this is actually set in like 1920s England. And so it was just not the type of setting that I was expecting. It was not the type of book that I was expecting, because I was expecting more of a fantasy book, and this was like more of a mystery book and more paranormal fantasy. And then the only thing that was actually keeping me there was kind of the romance, which I just got to the point where I was just like, I don't think it's going anywhere. So I just decided to stop reading the books, and I stopped with the third book. I was about halfway through it and just decided to stop reading it, and I don't think I'm gonna be going back to this series at all. The next book that I want to talk about is Vilest Things by Chloe Gong. This book is the sequel to Immortal Longings, which Immortal Longings was a very hit or miss book for me. I both hated and loved it. The thing I loved about it was the magic system. I thought it was really unique and interesting, and I liked the way the magic was being used. The thing I didn't like about it was the like plot structure, where it was like a battle royale plot structure. So like Immortal Longings, I didn't love. I ended up giving it like 3 stars, but I thought I might potentially really like Vilest Things because we're getting outside of that battle royale plot structure, and like there is some interesting, unique like political intrigue in this story. But I feel like in Vilest Things, what I loved about the magic was like no longer happening. Like, it wasn't being used regularly. The magic that I really like is that they can kind of like hop from one body to another body, which I find incredibly interesting, which was used very copiously in the first book, but in the second book, they're all just staying in the same bodies. Like, it's not as interesting, even though like the bodies that they're in, there's a reason they're staying in those bodies. But at the same time, the love that I had for the magic system is just not being utilized. And then the politics got boring. I don't know why. Like, it just wasn't that interesting to me. And then just like something kind of like out of nowhere happened, and I was just like, I'm just not interested in this book, like at all. So I decided to put it down. I do not know if I'm gonna come back to this book. Probably not, which is why I put it on my DNF shelf. But let me know if you've read it and if you think that it's any good, because I did not love the first book, but I was hoping like the things that I hated about the first book would be fixed in the second book, which it was, but then there were a bunch of other things that I didn't like about the second book. So the next book I'd like to talk about is When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This is one of those books where I should have learned something about the book before I started reading it. Just the title and like the cover art alone made me go, yeah, this is gonna be a book I'm gonna love. But it's not. It has very a historical fiction vibe, but it's set in like an alternate timeline where like women literally became dragons, but like it's an alternate history, which is not really what I was expecting. But it's fine. Like, I just found it to be kind of boring, so that's why I ended up DNFing it. It's just not the type of book that I would normally pick up. I didn't do my research into it before picking it up. I mean, I don't like doing my research into books before I pick them up because then I feel like that spoils it for me. Because I don't do that, sometimes this happens where there's a book where I have really high expectations for that I just don't end up liking. So yeah, this was one of those books and I don't plan on picking it up again. Next, I want to talk about The Sheep Farmer's Daughter by Elizabeth Moon. So this is kind of an older like fantasy book that was one of the books that I wanted to pick up that I bought like used back like way back in the day when I was like looking for fantasy written by women that were not like romantasy. Like this was before romantasy was a thing, but I was like looking for more like high fantasy and like adventuristic type fantasy, and so I decided to pick this one up. I did not love it. It's a military fantasy, which I knew going into it that it was a military fantasy. I just didn't know how much of just like the military side of things that it would be about. Like I felt like there should have been a little bit more adventure happening in the part of it that I've actually read. Like it was just really slow moving and it wasn't a very long book, so I just feel like I was just getting bored with it, whereas it was kind of putting me into a reading slump, so I decided to put it down. I may pick it up again in the future, but for now it's on my DNF shelf. I don't think I'll be getting back to it. The next book I want to talk about is The Djinn Waits 100 Years by Shubnam. This is I believe it's a debut novel that I picked up at the beginning of the year because I liked the idea of the atmosphere of this book. I was just very much in the mood of like a magical realism type of atmosphere, which is what this book provided. I think the atmosphere of this book was really good, but it was just a really slow read for me, and then I ended up having to return it to the library. I tried to pick it up a few times after that and I just found it boring and like I wasn't like connecting with the characters at all, so I ended up putting it down. I really don't have any expectations to come back to it. And while I liked like the creativity of this book because it's about a djinn and it's about a young woman who goes to this house where the djinn is living in, so like there's an interesting like magical realism atmosphere there that I really like the concept of, but in execution I didn't love the actual story. Let me know in the comments if you picked up any of these books and liked them, so maybe I'll give them a chance next time. But that's all I have, you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up to support my channel, and please consider subscribing. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.